Hey, what is up, guys? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the difference between a high-end camera, like this baby right here, and an affordable camera, like a cell phone or a small mirrorless or DSLR camera. What is the difference? Let's talk about it. All right, so if you're a filmmaker or a videographer and you're just starting out, you're trying to decide what should I buy, I'm trying to get my first camera, or if you're trying to buy your next camera, you might be wondering, like, should I go with a high-end camera or should I stick with something more affordable? What is the actual difference between something that's really expensive, like a rig like this that costs, $20,000, $30,000 versus like my phone that's already in my pocket, already ready to go, and can shoot like pretty darn good videos? Is there really a difference? Should I buy the high-end camera? Is it worth investing the money? I'm going to talk about that today and talk about some of the things that actually go on there. So there's obviously a difference between the two cameras, but let's talk a little bit about what are the actual differences. Because you'll hear people say it's not about the camera. You can shoot just as good of footage on an iPhone as you can on a Red camera. And the reality is that while this sentiment is, I think, accurate for a lot of beginners, the reality being that, you know what? An experienced filmmaker shooting on a phone is probably going to produce a better product than a beginner filmmaker on like a Red or an Arri camera. And the reason is because ultimately what it comes down to is your skill as a filmmaker. You wouldn't judge a painter on the brush that they're using, and a painter that is the best in the world, their work doesn't look the way it does because they're using the best brush. However, a painter who is the best in the world is probably using the best brush because as a professional in your craft, it helps to use the best tools. And so I personally believe that every filmmaker should definitely work their way up to shooting on a camera like this because it's going to be the best tool. You're going to love working on it and it's just going to be amazing for you. But if you need to start out with something cheaper, there's nothing wrong with that either. So let's talk about what the differences are between these. And I've broken it down into three categories. So number one is looks. Obviously, there's a big difference in looks between this big behemoth camera and this tiny phone, right? And we have to talk about looks because I think this is a really important factor when it comes to cameras. The reality is, I believe a lot of filmmakers actually buy cameras based on their looks. It's not anything to be embarrassed about, but the reality is that there's a lot of status that comes from shooting on a big camera, right? As a filmmaker, you feel cool. Other people will see you and think that you're more professional, think that you're more legit because you're shooting on a big camera. And that's just the reality of it. That is the truth. And while it seems like a kind of a vanity thing, and it probably is, I see filmmakers like kitting out their cameras like this with matte box and follow focus and rails and monitors and everything like that to make it look big, and then posting pictures on social media because it's really cool. And there is that element of it. But there is also an argument to be made for the bigger camera. And that is that when you're working on set with a client, if it's a high-paying client especially, they're probably going to expect something like this. And you can give your client more confidence and help them feel more comfortable with you, and they're going to feel like they're getting a better value because you are showing up on set with a camera like this. Or even for lower paying clients, if somebody pays you a low amount for a video and you show up on set with something like this, they're going to feel like they're getting more value and more bang for their buck. The reality is that the clients don't know what the difference is. They don't know the technical aspects of this camera versus this one. It's just that it looks bigger, and so therefore it must be better, right? So while looks are not necessarily technically that important, it does play a role in your business as a filmmaker. And so having something like this is going to make you look more professional. Is that a good reason for you to go blow $30,000 on a camera? I don't know, because I don't think that having this nice camera is going to automatically bring in clients. If you can afford it, awesome. But if you can't and you're still trying to get clients, you would be better off investing in learning marketing and sales and cinematography skills in order to develop your skills so that you can start getting clients. And then something like this will become easy to afford because you have clients paying you enough money to be able to buy it. Number two is the functionality. So one of the major advantages of shooting on a nice high-end camera is the functionality. It's the features you get. One of the big differences between like a Red or an Arri camera, or even like Blackmagic or some of the higher end cinema cameras, and something like a Canon or a Sony DSLR or a mirrorless camera is that these cameras are made for shooting video. Whereas a Canon DSLR or mirrorless or like a Sony A7S or that kind of thing, those are actually photography cameras. They're made, the form factor is for photography, that have video features. Now, don't get me wrong, the video features on newer cameras have gotten really, really good, but when it comes down to it and you're working with it, it still is a photography camera. It's a hybrid, and so it doesn't quite have the same thing. So with a cinema camera like this, you're getting a camera that is geared towards video. So all of these settings that you need to set are right here on the screen, ready to go. Your aperture, your shutter speed, your frame rate, like those kind of things, instead of having to dig into the menus for them. A lot of times these cameras will have built-in ND filters. Sometimes they'll have video tools like peaking or false color that help you to get the image that you want on camera. And so you get all of those features with a camera like this, whereas you're not going to get them with a cheaper camera or with a phone or something like that. In addition to just the features or the functionality of the camera is also the form factor of the camera. So a more expensive camera is built so that it can accept attachments. It can take rails, it can take a follow focus, it can take a matte box, it can take a monitor, it can take handles and those kind of things that are going to help you to be able to shoot it. Whereas with an iPhone, that's going to be a lot more difficult to add on those things, or even with a DSLR or mirrorless camera, they just don't have the mounting points, they don't have the functionality for building it out into that type of camera. Now you can do it with a cage, you can put stuff on it, you can so that you can mount things to it and you can build it up the way that you need to, but it's not really built for that. You kind of have to use a lot of extra parts in order to make that happen. And number three, last but not least, let's talk about the quality. Obviously, there's a big difference in quality between an iPhone like this and a camera like this. Now, some of you guys might be thinking you've seen some amazing footage shot on an iPhone and you've seen stuff that looks incredible. And I've got videos that I've shot on iPhones that are, on my channel here that you can go watch. And the reality is, yes, you can get like a really good image out of an iPhone if you know what you're doing. And so you might wonder, like, what's the point of investing in something like this? And the reality is that the image on the iPhone is going to, or any smartphone really, or DSLRs or even mirrorless cameras, but especially with the iPhone, is going to come out probably overly sharp. It's going to be overly saturated. It's going to have, not as natural of colors. And you're going to see things like that are happening because what's happening is the phone manufacturers are building a camera that is supposed to suit everyone, right? They just want like a decent looking image that works for everyone. But if you're shooting high end and you're shooting commercials and that kind of stuff, you probably don't want something that's so sharp or so saturated. You want more natural colors. You want something that's a little bit softer, and that's what you're going to get out of this. So there's a difference between technical quality and creative quality, and I've already done a video on the difference between those two things, so you can watch that. But what you're going to get with a camera like this versus a lower end camera is technical quality. What does technical quality mean? It means things like dynamic range. You're going to get a smoother roll off in the highlights and the shadows. It's things like resolution. You're going to be able to shoot a higher resolution on some of these cameras. It's going to be the things like the processing power in the camera, how the camera processes the image. It's going to be the color science. That's a huge one. How natural of colors can it replicate in the skin tones and in other things? With more expensive lenses, you're going to get smoother roll off and a more pleasing image. You're going to get a shallower depth of field and more bokeh. These are the little things that add up when you start building out a camera like this that is more expensive, and those little things do go a long ways towards giving you a better looking image. But that's just the technical quality. The other side of the equation is the creative quality, and the creative quality is what you bring as a filmmaker to your craft. It's the lighting, it's the composition, it's the camera settings you choose, it's your editing, it's the color grading, it's the music, it's the storytelling above all. And the reality is that when it comes down to it, that's what really matters. If you go to a movie and you go, wow, this was such an incredible movie, you're usually not talking about the dynamic range or the color science of the camera. Usually in most cases, what you're talking about was the story. The story was good. And so whether you're shooting on a camera like this or you're shooting on a phone like this, keep in mind that the thing that really makes a video really good and really compelling is the story, the lighting, the composition, the things that you bring to the table as a filmmaker. And so if you can't afford something like this, don't feel like you still can't be a filmmaker. Instead, take the time and the energy and the money to invest in yourself to learn those skills and get better at those skills regardless of what you're shooting on. And I promise if you take those skills and you learn how to create really high-end work using a phone or a cheaper camera and learn the sales and marketing skills for getting clients, for getting people to hire you and building relationships with them and making things happen, you'll get to the point where you can afford one of these, or you can afford to at least rent one of these and start using it as your main camera. But until that point, it's just not really necessary. So there you go, guys. There's my quick look at the difference between a high-end camera and an affordable camera. Let me know what you thought down below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. And of course, if you're a filmmaker who's trying to learn the art of cinematography and the art of sales and marketing, I highly recommend checking out our Cinema Mastery course. It's one of the best courses in the world, if I do say so myself, when it comes to cinematography. And it is jam-packed with everything you could possibly need to know to make your craft go from looking like standard videography to looking like professional high-end cinematography, regardless of what you're shooting on, whether it's this or it's this. So I'll leave a link to that down below so you can check it out. I've got a free training down there that's an hour long that goes through some of my top tips for creating cinematic images. So if you're not quite ready to buy yet and you want to take a look at that, take a look at it. And maybe that way you can kind of try before you buy, if you will. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you guys on the next one.